Welcome to a Dash of Life podcast, where every episode brings you a touch of spirit, a pinch of passion, and a zest for life. I'm Shalon Lizelle, and let's embark on this soulful journey, one dash at a time. All right, so on today's episode of a Dash of Life podcast, we are going to talk about men's mental health, and what we're going to unpack during this episode is basically going to focus on societal expectations, toxic masculinity, awareness of health, focusing on yourself and where you are at, maybe something to resonate with you. So let's get into it. All right, so when we first start talking about men's mental health, right? It starts with yourself. You have to have an understanding of who you are. And if you don't, then that's a whole nother episode. That's a whole nother issue. But at least you have to acknowledge where you're at. You have to recognize and be open to your feelings. Like, what are you feeling? I have met many men who are not in tune with their feelings. They are not accepting or expressive about their feelings. Obviously, we know that many young boys grow up, especially in our Black communities, they are taught to suppress their feelings and not talk about how they're really feeling. So that starts the problem, I think. Then you also have these generational habits that we pick up and carry on through future generations. So let's start there and we'll unpack this a little bit. As I mentioned, many young boys grow up to disregard their feelings, in which they grow into men who are not able to address what they're feeling and how that impacts them. So they then in turn create an anomaly of unresolved tension and carry it with them for months, years, even decades. And being a man in our society today is definitely, in my opinion, an uphill battle. And I will say, to say the least, right? Especially if you are Black or brown. The expectations that are placed on our Black men and brown men, they are a lot, right? They're a lot. I mentioned the historical passing of generational habits creates these unrealistic expectations for future generations. And if you are a boy, you are taught to adhere to these societal expectations. You can call them societal norms, but everyone knows that there is an expectation out there for men to act a certain way, to be a certain way. Young boys too. Like, you know, how many of you have been told when you were younger, suck it up, you know? So I feel like that the fact that we create these societal norms for how men are supposed to present creates all of these issues. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe that men have certain factors that they have to be responsible as a man and adhere to as a man, and also they need to uphold. However, it should not, and I'm gonna repeat this, it should not be at the detriment of their mental health. How many of you, I'm gonna ask this question, so how many of you out here, and I could be talking, this episode is focused specifically on men's mental health because I think we talk more about women's mental health as opposed to men's, but I'm going to ask you all this question. And men, women, how much of your mental health and the healthiness of your mental health is wrapped up in expectations, societal expectations for how you should act, how you should respond to something, how you were taught when you grew up. You better put your big girl pants on and just keep going, right? Like, we are taught consistently from our parents, from generational habits that are passed on, to just sweep things under the rug and not actually deal with the emotions that come with that. How many of you have had a parent pass away when you were younger and just didn't get therapy, or you had a sibling pass away, you didn't get therapy? I will say that some parents probably didn't even think of it, They didn't even think about therapy because it's been a taboo subject for such a long time. And there's this stigma that still exists in our society about that. So just think about that. Like, how much of your mental health is wrapped up in societal expectations, in what you grew up learning from your parents and what habits you grew up from learning from your community. So think about that. But I think also we need to get into societal acceptances. So I think as a society, we should be accepting of men presenting in a weakened state. Now, do we say stay there? No, absolutely not, right? But I think there's so much pressure on men to just be men, right? Which if you think about it, it sounds so crazy. It sounds so crazy. Like, and I'm not gonna say, so don't twist the words. I am not going to say that I don't believe that there are specific actions men need to take and specific adherences, roles, if you want to call them roles, that men need to adhere to. However, I think where we're amiss is that it's all the time. Like, there is no grace for a man feeling his emotions and feeling less than, right? Not 100%. There's no grace for that. And I think that's where we need to go as society. So I'll give you an example. If a husband comes home, he opens up to his wife that he's struggling mentally, she should then open up space for him to express what his concerns are without judgment. I see far too often that men do not have the space with their partner to be vulnerable in this space, to be completely open in this space. And I think that's because, wives have, or partners have, their expectations of their husbands as well. I would hope, it is my hope that, like, if your husband came home, well, one, your husband felt comfortable enough to say those words to you. Like, babe, I'm struggling right now. One, I would hope that your husband felt comfortable enough to say those words to you. But then two, that if he did say something like that to you, that you were in a place where you responded and said, all right, babe, let's sit down, talk about this, see what's going on. And so for that, I feel like there needs to be that openness. There needs to be that acceptance. There needs to be that response. And from a societal perspective, we need to push that as the norm, that men can be vulnerable. I just watched this video. This wasn't planned, but I just watched this video of Tyrese talking about crying and that men cry. And, like, I don't know. Like, we shouldn't have, well, that's where we're at. Let's put it that way. That's where we are right now as society, that, Tyrese has to come out and say, like, this stuff hurts. Everything that I've been through hurts. And I praise him for that, for being, one, publicly vulnerable about it, because I feel like that will open the door for other men to be comfortable or start to feel comfortable about expressing grief and loss and how they can work through that, and how, no, they're not always okay. And we shouldn't expect that. That is such a crazy misnomer, such a I don't want to say bad, but it's such a negative expectation that we expect people to be 100% all the time. That's just not even realistic, right? Let's put it that way. It's not even realistic. So again, I'm just going to say we need to push that as a norm, that men can be vulnerable. Allow men to be vulnerable in their feelings, in their grief, in their experiences. We are not robots. And our emotions make us human. Our emotions make us human. So if we're expecting humans, male humans, to not express their emotion, not feel their emotion, then you're expecting a robot, essentially. There will be days when this is necessary. And I'm not saying that this would be a consistent, state to be in, right? This is not a consistent state to be in. However, when a man is going through something, we have to give him that space to be vulnerable enough, to cry, to express his emotions. They might just be working on something, that is not working out for them. And they're having to deal with the emotions of that, potential failure, just having to pivot and the stress around that. So when life is going that way, we need to give our men the space to be not 100%. It can present as anything, obviously, but just a man being unsettled about where life is taking him and his current struggle. It doesn't mean that he is not confident. I'll tell you, most men, when they leave the house, they're out there, they're doing their jobs, they are facing, and we already know that our Black and brown men have a completely different experience out in the world. And so he may go out there confident, but the world may just come back and beat him up. And so in that space, we need to give him, that space to be vulnerable and to talk about how he's feeling about that. All it means is that at this point in time, and one of my pet peeves is for people to judge others based off a point in time in their life. So don't do that. You don't know what that person's been through their entire life, what they've been working on. Something can change in the drop of the hat, right? So don't judge people by a moment. If you are experiencing them in a moment of time in their lives, don't judge them. You have no clue what they've been through. But anyway, not to get on a tangent with that. But again, we're talking about men going out into the world, having their own different, more difficult experience than others, and then coming back and, he may need a little bit of extra support and encouragement. Because as 9 times out of 10, this situation is not permanent. And he usually exhibits that confidence. You know him, right? You know him. If it's your husband, hopefully before y'all got married, you got to know one another. But you know who he is. You know how strong he is. You know what he's capable of. So speak life into that. Speak life into him in that moment. Don't tear him down. So being on 10 all the time. Can you imagine being on 10 and having to show up all the time? Just think about it. Can you imagine when it comes to assertiveness, right? We're expecting our men to be assertive, being a leader, and I'll get into that in a little bit. I may take a little bit more time with this episode, but we'll see. Being on 10 all the time is draining, right? And of course, men get exhausted. Ladies, I will come back for you. This is specifically focused on men because, one, I wanted to have this episode out in June when it's men's mental health, but I couldn't get there, which is okay. But I feel like there is so much more work that needs to be done with men's mental health, and that's why I wanted to start with this episode first. It's draining, right? Men are going out here, they're being on 10. They have to present to the world on 10. They have to. Otherwise, they're not going to get the success that they're wishing for. They will not be seen as a dominant figure in society if they do not present to society on 10 all the time. So when they come home, they don't want to be on 10. That's my opinion. Y'all correct me if you feel I'm not right with that. But when they're home, around their safe space, they don't want to be on 10. So the point here is, although society's norms define what a man, and when I say this, society gives words, assigns words to men in terms of how they need to show up and what they're expected to exhibit. So please give them the opportunity to not be that sometimes. So we're back, and thank you for coming back and staying with me. And please feel free to comment below, subscribe to this channel, like the video if you like what I'm saying. You can always reach out on social media for me as well. And I would like to continue this conversation. So based off of maybe some responses that I get, I will certainly come back maybe in a future episode to revisit this. All right, so next we're going to talk about suffering in silence. And this is just across the board, y'all. There are so many people that are out here that are suffering in silence because either they have generational habits that they've picked up that you don't talk about your feelings, you don't talk about that, you don't want to be seen as being weak, etc. And then in a little bit, we'll talk about some of these words that are assigned to men by society. And so if we're talking about suffering in silence, if we give and allow men the ability and the space to be able to express their emotions, then that will break them up out of the generational habits that they have learned, and be able to have that release. We all need that release. So I think, and I don't know, some of us may know some of this information or not, but there are some staggering statistics when it comes to men's mental health. We know 75% of suicides are men. Suicide is the leading cause of death for men under the age of 50. And an estimated 25% of men live with mental illness. So think about that. Leading cause of death of men under 50. How many, just gonna ask the question, how many suicides do you think could have been prevented from men feeling like they have an open space, an open place, open atmosphere to speak about what they're truly feeling inside? I want you to think about this. And I'm telling you, this is very serious. This is not something that we should take lightly at all. What are some of the causes? If we go back to upbringing, and how men are brought up and taught at such a young age that expressing emotion is looked upon as being weak, especially if you have children that are playing sports. If we tell young boys as they're growing up, you better stop crying before I give you something to cry about. I'm not going to go into all the stuff that we heard as young children, but if a young man or a young boy doesn't grow up with the comfort of expressing emotions as a young boy, then as he grows into adulthood, he just moves on and suppresses those emotions, just sweeps it under the rug. And so then what happens as it occurs and continually occurs time and time again, then it becomes a habit. So then we get into, this is just my normal state, right? Because I have not had the space to express my emotions in the manner that I needed to, completely, fully. Young men walk into adulthood with an ineffective means to become familiar with the handling of his emotions, which in turn impacts their mental health. So I'm going to back that up and I'm going to repeat it again. The practice as it happens time and time again, then becomes a habit. And young men walk into adulthood with an ineffective means to become familiar with his emotions and handling them, which then in turn impacts their mental health. So if we have men that cannot express their emotions, but they're told when they're younger, keep going, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Whatever parents tell their children, men don't cry. You've heard that before. I'm sure you've heard that before. So we cannot expect men to be out here having the capability or the understanding that if I grew up as a young boy and I was told, to stop crying, put your big boy pants on, keep going, whatever, then of course he's going to grow up thinking that expressing emotion is there's something wrong with it, and it's something negative. So we have to flip that script. We have to flip that script and allow men the space. Allow our young boys to express what they're feeling. Now I'm going to pivot into societal expectations. So when we talk about societal expectations, what are some words? What are some buzzwords? What are some words assigned to the role of being a man? What are some words that you can think of that are assigned or are related to men's mental health? Here's a few. It's not all inclusive, but here are a few that resonate with me. Strength, being stoic, self-sufficient, resilient, manly, tough, a provider, dominant, confident, brave, dependable, and assertive. And again, I could go on and on, but I feel like these words really resonate with me because I think that's what I've heard growing up and seen growing up in my community. But the impact of hearing these words over time has a tremendous influence on how men present themselves to society. Men are not allowed to be sissies. Being strong, tough, and stoic can discourage men from being vulnerable. It can make them feel like they cannot reach out for help or be open to their feelings, as I mentioned before. Being a provider, protector, leader puts an immense amount of pressure on them to fulfill these roles. And also the pressure to maintain that for their families, right? Being assertive, confident, dominant boxes men into these defined roles. And it gives the false, sometimes fatal, as we know with the suicide rates of men, sometimes fatal notion that anything outside of that means you are not. And I think this is such a problem for me because a man can be an amazing person, but go through a specific period in their life where they're struggling. That does not define him. And so when we let society dictate what is a man, and when we let society dictate how a man or men should present to the world, then when they're not that, it doesn't mean that they're not that. So I want to keep that clear. It bothers me to no end that just because a man is struggling doesn't mean that he's not all of those things or hasn't been. You have to give him that space and that grace. As a woman, this is what I want from my partner. For me, myself, I do want a provider. I do want somebody that is assertive or a leader, right? I do want that in my relationship because, and I feel like most women would feel like this, there's a safety component with that, right? And that may be something that we grew up with hearing and getting that passed down from our previous generation or the generation before, right? And I will say, yes, that is what I want. However, the key here is that it should not be at the detriment of the man himself and his identity and who he is. A marriage is a partnership. A marriage is a partnership. And it should be operated as such. Ladies, give your man the ability, the space, the place, the understanding that he's not going to be 100% all the time. Are you 100% all the time? But anyway, marriage should be a partnership. And so as a partner, you have a vested interest in the other partner, right? And I'm not like harping on this, and I'm not, this is not a negative connotation, but I just want you to understand that some of these pressures and some of these generational habits and some of these generational societal expectations can be the cause or the catalyst for men's mental health breaks, if you will. All right, so we talked about societal expectations. What I have not talked about yet is awareness of health. And I will say the mental health space is vastly underfunded in the United States, and it may take some time. However, there is help out there. There are many resources available to men seeking help. There are support groups out here. I think men have one of the most interconnected networks than anyone else on this earth. So that right there, use your networks and your friends and your frat brothers, your cousins in them. Use your cousins in them. I'm so serious about this, y'all. But have a conversation. If men talked about mental health the way they talk about sports, I think it would be easy. So think about that. Next time you're with your boys, next time you have, you're getting up with your friends or whatever, next time, talk about mental health. Have it be a topic of conversation. And the weakness that's associated with that, throw it out the window. Just throw it out there. Talk with your boys. Make it okay for them to talk about if they're struggling. Because the last thing that we want is for another man to commit suicide. And some of them may be at the edge right now. Y'all got to check in with each other. Therapy, there are therapy groups out there. There are therapists. And you might need psychotherapy. It just depends. And again, I'm not diagnosing or treating any kind of mental health issues. That is for you to follow up for yourself. But my goal here is to make you feel like that you're comfortable enough to go seek help, because you are here for a reason. You are here for a reason. You are here for a purpose. And we all need you to show up into your purpose. So keep that in mind. I always say that. Keep that in mind. I am not the end all be all for anything, but I do know that I have a God who has given me a platform and a voice to help others. And that's the point. So if you like this, please like, comment, share, subscribe to A Dash of Life podcast. And, we're in this together, y'all. We're in this together. So I thank you for listening in. If there's something you want me to expand on more in a future episode, let me know that too. Also, share it. Share it with somebody that you think can benefit from it, right? All right. Make the most of your dash. So the next episode of A Dash of Life, and I will be releasing new episodes just once a week. I'm going to release them every Thursday. On the next episode of A Dash of Life podcast, I am going to talk about burying your pain, not releasing it. We need to bury it. So stay tuned for that. And again, like, subscribe, share, give me feedback. I appreciate you all as I venture into this new realm of helping others. All right. God bless y'all. Thank you for joining us on this episode of A Dash of Life podcast. I hope today's conversation added a touch of spirit, a pinch of passion, and a zest for life to your day.